They mocked her shaking hands. The quiet jest, a murmur between two young corporals sorting ammunition crates, was not meant for her to hear, but sound carried in the dry, thin air of forward operating base Kestrel. Specialist Anya Rostova heard it. She always heard everything. The tremor in her hands was a constant, a fine, high-frequency vibration that made the simple act of signing her transfer papers a study in deliberate motion. It was a betrayer, an open secret broadcast to a world that judged weakness on sight. The crisis had not yet begun. The pressure had not yet mounted. But in the dismissive glance of Colonel Madson, she saw the turning point that was to come. She was a ghost in a machine that had forgotten her, an old tool left to rust, and soon, they would need her more than they could possibly imagine. Anya stood in the dust-choked expanse of the motor pool, her duffel bag at her feet. She was 58 years old, a fact her file stated plainly, but a fact the military bureaucracy seemed to treat as a clerical error. Her uniform, a simple logistics specialist's patch on the sleeve, was clean but faded, worn soft by years of service that predated the births of nearly everyone on this base. The tremor was worse today, a hum that traveled from her fingertips up her forearms. She curled her fingers into loose fists, a practiced gesture to still the motion, but it was like trying to calm a hummingbird's wings by cupping it in your hands. The energy had to go somewhere. Corporal Kenji-chun, barely 20, nudged his friend, Private Gallo. "Look at that," he whispered, tilting his head toward Anya. "Procurement sent us Grandma. Hope she doesn't drop the spare parts." Gallo snickered, a sharp, youthful sound that was quickly swallowed by the oppressive hum of the base's generators. "Got the shakes bad. Nerves, probably. This ain't no supply depot in Germany." Anya's gaze remained fixed on the distant perimeter fence, a shimmering line of heat and razor wire against the pale brown mountains. She registered their words as data, devoid of malice, simply the predictable assessment of the uninformed. They saw a frail, older woman with a neurological quirk. They saw a liability. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, tracked the movement of a guard in a watchtower, his posture too relaxed, his rifle held too casually. She noted the pattern of dust kicked up by patrol vehicles, a rhythm as predictable as a metronome. She saw vulnerabilities everywhere. Her assignment was to the quartermaster's tent, a glorified warehouse for counting widgets and sorting uniforms. It was a quiet, dead-end posting, the final stop for a career that had, on paper, been unremarkable. But her papers were a masterpiece of omission. They were a lie agreed upon, a fiction constructed to protect a truth the modern army no longer had a place for. The tremor was not nerves. It was a souvenir, a cost of doing business in a world of shadows and whispers, a world these boys couldn't even conceive of. And as she bent to lift her bag, her knuckles white but her grip firm, she knew this quiet posting was about to become very loud. The dismissal she had anticipated arrived in the form of Colonel Marcus Madson. He stormed out of the command post, a man wound tight with the constant, grinding pressure of command in a hostile zone. His face was a mask of sunburnt frustration, his eyes scanning the base for new problems to solve. They landed on Anya. He stopped, his jaw tightening. He marched over, his boots crunching on the gravel with an authority that demanded attention. The two young corporals, Chun and Gallo, wisely made themselves scarce, melting back between the stacks of crates. "Who in the hell are you?" Matson's voice was a low growl, laced with impatience. He didn't wait for an answer. He glanced at the logistics patch on her sleeve, then at her face, then with open disdain at her hands. The tremor was visible, a slight but undeniable dance of her fingertips. "This is FOB Kestrel, a forward operating base. Not a hospital. Not a retirement community. What are you doing here, specialist?" Anya met his gaze without flinching. Her own voice was low, calm, a stark contrast to his barely contained anger. "Specialist Anya Rostova, sir. I'm your new inventory control specialist." She held out her transfer orders, a thin sheaf of papers. Her hand shook as she extended it, and Madson stared at the tremor as if it were a personal insult. He snatched the papers from her grip. He scanned them, his lips pulling back in a sneer of disbelief. Inventory control? You're telling me Central Command, in their infinite wisdom, looked at my requisition for a combat-ready logistics NCO and sent me a U. He waved a hand dismissively in her direction. I need someone who can hump ammo boxes under fire, not someone who needs help opening a jar of pickles. The insult was plain, brutal, and public. A nearby mechanic paused his work on a Humvee, listening. Anya's expression did not change. She had been insulted by far more dangerous men than Colonel Madson. My qualifications are in the file, sir. I am capable of performing the duties assigned. Your file, Madson scoffed, tapping the papers. Your file says you've spent the last 10 years counting blankets at Ramstein. It says you're 2 years from mandatory retirement. It doesn't say a damn thing that justifies wasting a seat on a C-130 to fly you into an active war zone. He folded the papers and shoved them back at her chest. I'm calling this in. This is a mistake. A dangerous one. You'll be on the next transport out of here. Until then, go to the QM tent and stay out of the way. Don't touch anything sharp. Or heavy. He turned his back on her, the conversation over in his mind. He was a man of action, of tangible results, and he saw Anya as nothing more than a piece of administrative driftwood that had washed up on his shore. He needed soldiers, not relics. He didn't see the way her eyes followed him, not with anger, but with a deep, dispassionate analysis. He didn't see the way she absorbed the insult, filed it away, and let it settle into the vast, cold silence within her. He was a problem to be managed, like an unstable detonator or a nervous politician. And she was, above all else, a problem solver. She picked up her duffel bag, the tremor in her hand a steady, familiar hum, and walked toward the quartermaster's tent, a place to be invisible. For now. The quartermaster's tent was a cavern of canvas and organized chaos, smelling of dust, mildew, and new rubber. It was run by a harried sergeant named Diaz, a man who seemed permanently on the verge of a paperwork-induced seizure. He gave Anya a cursory glance, noted her age and the logistics patch, and pointed her to a corner stacked high with cardboard boxes. Start with those, he said, not unkindly. We need a full inventory of all Class 9 repair parts. Serial numbers, quantities, condition. Log it all in the tablet. He handed her a ruggedized piece of tech. Try not to break it. Anya's work was her sanctuary. For the next 2 days, she did exactly as she was told. She sat on a folding stool in her designated corner, surrounded by the mundane guts of a military machine. Gaskets, filters, wiring harnesses, spark plugs. She opened each box, her movements economical and precise. Her shaking hands, which seemed so clumsy in the open, became instruments of incredible focus when given a task. She would brace her left wrist against the edge of a box, using it as a fulcrum, while her right hand, despite its tremor, deftly handled the small, individually wrapped parts. Her fingers, though they vibrated, could distinguish the slightest imperfection in a metal seal, the faint tackiness of a deteriorating rubber hose, the subtle difference in weight between a genuine part and a cheap counterfeit. While her hands worked, her mind worked harder. She did not just count. She observed. From her corner, she had a clear view of the tent's entrance and a slice of the base beyond. She watched the flow of people, the rhythm of daily life. She saw the way soldiers from the EOD team, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, carried their gear, the focused, almost reverent way they handled their specialized equipment. She saw the patrol schedules, noted the 20-minute lag between the evening patrol returning and the night watch taking up key positions along the western perimeter. A 20-minute window, enough time for anything. Her hearing, honed by years of listening for the snap of a tripwire or the whisper of a footfall in the dark, catalogued the sounds of the base. She learned to distinguish the growl of the Bradleys from the higher-pitched whine of the Humvees. She could tell by the shift in the generator's hum when the mess hall's industrial ovens were switched on. She heard the quiet conversations, the gossip, the complaints. She learned that the base's primary EOD technician, a staff sergeant named Reyes, was considered a genius, a prodigy with a perfect record. She also learned he was arrogant, preferring to work alone, and had a habit of cutting corners on safety protocols when he felt a device was beneath him. This, too, was a vulnerability. The tremor in her hands was a constant companion to her thoughts. It was not a weakness to be hidden, but a part of her process. It was a physical manifestation of a hyper-aroused nervous system, a state she had once been required to maintain for months at a time. The stimulants they had given her in Ghost Division had kept her awake, alert, and alive through missions that existed only in redacted after-action reports. The price for that superhuman focus was a permanent echo in her nerves, a hum that never ceased. Now, in the quiet of the supply tent, the hum was a reminder. It was the ghost of the operator she had been, living inside the shell of the specialist she now was. One afternoon, Corporal Chun came in for a box of batteries. He watched her for a moment, his earlier mockery replaced by a kind of pity. Her right hand was vibrating as she tried to write on the tablet screen with the stylus. She paused, took a slow breath, and used her left thumb to steady her right index finger, guiding the stylus with a two-handed grip. The writing was neat, perfectly legible. Chun looked away, a flicker of shame on his face. He saw an old woman struggling. Anya saw a problem and its solution. The pressure began as a crackle over the radio, a burst of static and panicked shouting that sliced through the mundane afternoon quiet. Anya was cross-referencing shipping manifests, the tremor in her hands a low, steady hum, when Sergeant Diaz cursed and turned up the volume on the comms unit in the corner of the tent. The voice was young, terrified. "Hit! Convoy is hit. VCI-3 is on fire. We're taking fire from the ridge. Oh God. Reyes is down. I repeat, EOD is down." A cold dread washed over the tent. Colonel Madson's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding, but laced with an edge of his own barely suppressed alarm. "Red Falcon, this is Kestrel 6. Give me a sit rep. What is your location? How many casualties?" The reports trickled in, each one worse than the last. A standard resupply convoy, less than 2 kilometers from the base, had been struck by a massive, command-detonated IED. The lead vehicle, a heavily armored VCI, was a burning wreck. There were multiple casualties. And Staff Sergeant Reyes, the base's star EOD tech who had been riding along to inspect a cleared route, was among the most critical. Panic is a contagion. It spread from the command post outwards, a wave of urgent shouts, running feet, and the scream of a klaxon alarm ordering all non-essential personnel to take cover. Through the opening of the supply tent, Anya could see medics scrambling toward the gate, soldiers reinforcing perimeter defenses, their earlier laxness replaced by a tense, frightened readiness. Then came the second blow. A drone sent up to survey the attack site spotted it. Another device. This one wasn't on the road to the convoy. It was on the main supply route into FOB Kestrel, less than 300 meters from the main gate. It was a different type of threat. A pressure plate trigger was clearly visible, buried in the dirt track. It was large, and it was active. The base was now an island, its lifeline severed, with a ticking time bomb sitting on its doorstep. Colonel Madson's voice was back on the command net, stripped of all its earlier arrogance, replaced by the raw metal of desperation. "Get me backup EOD from Bagram. Now!" The reply was static-laced and grim. The nearest quick reaction force was engaged with a separate incident 60 clicks to the south. The backup EOD unit was with them. Estimated time to arrival, 4 hours. Best case, 4 hours. The device on their doorstep could be a simple pressure plate IED, or it could be a complex daisy chain system designed to draw them in. Could be on a timer. Could be anything. With Reyes incapacitated and no replacement available, they were blind and helpless. The entire base held its breath. Inside the supply tent, Sergeant Diaz was pacing, his face pale. For hours, they could level the gate with a device that big. "We can't get the wounded in. We can't get anyone out." Anya remained on her stool, her hands resting on her knees. The tremor was still there, but her mind was a sea of calm. She was listening, processing. The chaos, the fear, the ticking clock. It was all familiar territory. It was the environment in which she had done her life's most important work. This was not a supply inventory problem. This was a Spectre problem. And Spectre was waking up. The first intervention was small, almost incidental, a footnote in the growing crisis. As the medevac team prepared to circumvent the main gate and retrieve the wounded from the convoy via a hazardous backtrack, a new alarm was raised. A runner burst into the command post, his face white. One of the secondary explosions from the initial IED attack had thrown a piece of ordnance over the perimeter fence. It had landed 50 feet from the med tent, a small cylindrical object half buried in the soft earth. It was smoking. Chaos erupted anew. The area around the med tent was the designated casualty collection point. Now it was a kill zone. Soldiers shouted, creating a wide, panicked cordon. Medics with stretchers were frozen, unable to approach the very place they needed to be. Madson, his face a thundercloud of frustration, ran toward the scene, screaming for everyone to get back. Where the hell is my EOD backup? Someone get eyes on that thing. From the door of the supply tent, Anya watched. She saw the object clearly. An unexploded submunition from a cluster bomb, likely an old piece of Soviet-era ordnance repurposed by the insurgents. It was notoriously unstable, with a chemical fuse that was probably degraded and unpredictable. The smoke was a bad sign. It meant the chemical reaction had started, however slowly, could detonate at any moment. While Madson was still shouting orders that no one could execute, Anya walked out of the tent. She moved with a steady, unhurried pace that was unervingly calm in the midst of the pandemonium. She walked past the shouting soldiers, past the frozen medics, and directly toward the smoking cylinder. "Ma'am, get back!" a young lieutenant yelled, his voice cracking. "That's a UXO." Anya didn't respond. She stopped 10 feet away, her eyes scanning the device, her mind a cold, fast-moving calculator. She saw the corrosion on the casing, the color of the smoke, the way it was seated in the dirt. Her mind cycled through dozens of similar devices she had encountered in Chechnya, in Bosnia, in places that didn't officially exist. She knelt. "Someone stop her!" Madson roared, his voice raw with disbelief. But no one moved. They were transfixed. Anya's hands were shaking. The tremor was obvious now, stark and visible to everyone watching. She reached into a cargo pocket on her pants and pulled out a standard-issue multi-tool. With her left hand braced on her knee, she used the pliers on the tool to gently, carefully, pull a length of commo wire from a nearby damaged fence post. Her movements were fluid, economical. Despite the vibration, there was no hesitation, no wasted motion. She fashioned a small hook on the end of the wire. Her breathing was even, in out. The world shrank to the device in front of her. She could feel the hum in her nerves, the familiar thrum of absolute focus. She hooked the wire around a small, almost invisible pin near the base of the fuse assembly. She didn't pull. She rotated it, a precise 45-degree counterclockwise turn. The smoke sputtered, then stopped. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. She then used the wire to gently pry the fuse housing away from the main charge. Came loose with a soft click. The device was inert. She stood up, wiped her hands on her trousers, and dropped the harmless fuse into her pocket. The entire procedure had taken less than 30 seconds. She turned and walked back toward the supply tent, her expression as placid as if she had just been checking the mail. She didn't look at Madson. She didn't look at the stunned faces of the soldiers. She simply went back to her corner, sat on her stool, and picked up her inventory tablet. The crisis, for her, was over. For everyone else, it was just beginning. The shift in perception was not a tidal wave, but a slow, turning tide. It began with Corporal Chun and Private Gallo. They had been near the med tent, tasked with setting up overflow cots. They had seen the whole thing. The panic, the smoking ordnance, and the old woman with the shaking hands who walked into the center of it all and rendered it harmless with a piece of wire and a multi-tool. They stood in stunned silence long after Anya had returned to her tent. Did you see that?" Gallo whispered, his voice full of awe. Chun nodded slowly, his eyes wide. Her hands, they were shaking the whole time, but she She wasn't scared. It was like the shakes didn't matter. He remembered his joke about her dropping spare parts. The pity he had felt watching her struggle with the tablet. A hot flush of shame crept up his neck. She knew exactly what she was doing, like she'd done it 100 times before. The story spread through the lower ranks like wildfire, a piece of impossible gossip that everyone wanted to believe. The old lady from logistics, who disarmed a UXO while the colonel was still shouting. The details grew with each telling. She used a paperclip. She did it with her eyes closed. She stared it down until it was too scared to explode. The mythology of Anya Rostova began not in a classified file, but in the barracks whispers of young soldiers who had witnessed a moment of impossible calm under pressure. Colonel Madson felt the shift, too. He stood near the now-safe med tent, watching the medics finally rush forward to set up for the incoming casualties. The small, inert cylinder lay where Anya had left it, looking pathetically harmless. His mind replayed the scene. Her steady walk, her utter disregard for the danger, the unnerving precision of her trembling hands. It didn't compute. He had dismissed her as a frail, useless burden. But what he had just witnessed was an act of supreme confidence and expertise. It wasn't luck. The way she had rotated the pin, the specific angle, that was knowledge. He stormed back to the command post, his frustration now mixed with a heavy dose of confusion. "Get me her file again," he barked at the comms officer. "The full one, not the transfer summary. I want everything you can find on a specialist Anya Rostova." The comms officer, a young sergeant, typed furiously. After a few minutes, he shook his head. "Sir, this is all there is. Her record is clean. Too clean. 10 years as a logistics specialist at Ramstein Air Base. Before that, another 10 years in various CONUS-based supply roles. It's all logistics and inventory management. No EOD school. No special training. It's a completely flat record, sir. It's almost like it was built to be boring." Madson stared at the screen, at the bland, unremarkable career of the woman who had just done the impossible. "That can't be right," he muttered, more to himself than to the sergeant. "No one learns to do what she just did by counting blankets." He was a man who believed in order, in records, in the clear, delineated lines of military hierarchy and training. Anya Rostova was an anomaly that broke all the rules. His certainty about her was shattered, replaced by a grudging, unsettling curiosity. He still had a major crisis on his hands, the massive IED at the gate, but now there was a new, unpredictable variable in his equation. A variable with shaking hands and eyes that saw more than they let on. The mockery had died on his lips, replaced by a question he couldn't answer. Who was she? The main event was waiting. The crisis at the gate had not resolved itself. The drone feed showed the IED in stark, high-definition detail. It was a monster. Not one, but 3 large artillery shells, 155 millimeters, by the looks of it, wired together and buried under the road. A complex pressure plate, large enough to be triggered by any vehicle, was the primary detonator. But the drone's thermal camera revealed something more sinister. A secondary, internal heat signature. It had a battery. It had a timer. This wasn't just a trap. It was an appointment. For hours until backup EOD arrives is a fantasy, the intelligence officer said, his voice grim as he pointed to the monitor in the command post. "The thermal signature from the timer's power source is fluctuating, sir. That suggests a cheap, unstable battery. Could fail and trigger the circuit at any moment. Or the timer could just be short. We have no way of knowing if it's set for 6 hours or 6 minutes. Colonel Madson stared at the screen, the veins in his temple pulsing. The convoy wounded were being treated, but his base was still paralyzed. His career, and the lives of everyone at FOB Kestrel, were tethered to that unstable battery. He had no EOD tech. He had no options. His gaze drifted past the frantic officers in the CP, out the window, toward the QM tent. He saw a problem and only one, deeply improbable, solution. He had dismissed her. He had insulted her. Now he had to ask her for help. Swallowing a mouthful of pride that tasted like ash, he made the decision. "Get me Specialist Rostova." he ordered, his voice flat. Anya was brought to the command post. She walked in, her calm presence a stark contrast to the barely controlled panic in the room. She didn't look at the concerned faces. Her eyes went directly to the drone feed on the main screen. She studied the image of the IED for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. Her hands, held loosely at her sides, trembled. Madson cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "Specialist," he began, the word tasting foreign in his mouth. He couldn't bring himself to apologize, not yet. He settled for professionalism. "You have demonstrated a certain aptitude. We have a situation the base is not equipped to handle. That device is on a timer of unknown duration. We have no EOD assets available," he paused, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Can you do it?" It wasn't a question. It was a plea. Anya's eyes flickered from the screen to his face. She saw the desperation, the fear, the crumbling wall of his authority. She gave a single, small nod. "I will need a full EOD-9 suit and helmet, and a standard kit. The one you keep for Reyes." A wave of relief, mingled with sheer disbelief, washed through the room. Sergeant Diaz was dispatched to fetch the gear. As Anya began to suit up, with Chun and Gallo helping her, their hands far clumsier than hers, the sheer absurdity of the situation settled in. A logistics specialist, an old woman mocked for her shaking hands, was putting on the heavy, bomb-proof armor of an elite technician to face a device that would have challenged a master. The walk to the gate was the longest 300 meters in the history of FOB Kestrel. The entire base seemed to be watching. Soldiers stood in silent rows along the perimeter, their work forgotten. In the command post, everyone was glued to the monitor displaying the feed from Anya's helmet cam. The world narrowed to the sound of her breathing, amplified by the helmet's microphone, and the heavy, rhythmic clomp of her boots on the gravel. She reached the device and knelt. The helmet cam showed a close-up of the disturbed earth, the edge of the pressure plate, and a tangle of wires leading from it. Her gloved hands entered the frame. They were shaking. Inside the command post, someone swore softly. "Her hands," the intel officer whispered. "She can't possibly work on the delicate wiring with a tremor like that." Madson just watched, his jaw clenched. Anya's breathing remained slow and even. She ignored the primary pressure plate. Her gloved fingers, trembling, gently brushed dirt away from a secondary access panel on the casing of the lead artillery shell. It was a maintenance port, repurposed by the bomb maker. She found the seams, her touch surprisingly delicate despite the bulky gloves and the constant vibration. She produced a small pry tool from her kit and worked it into the seam. With a soft pop, the panel came loose. Inside was a rat's nest of wires. Red, blue, green, yellow, black. A timer, a cheap digital kitchen timer, was glued to the battery pack. The display read, 1 minute and 12 seconds. 1 minute and 12 seconds. A collective gasp echoed in the command post. Anya's breathing did not change. Her shaking hands hovered over the wires. Her voice, calm and low, came over the comms, directed at no one in particular. Classic misdirection. The primary pressure plate arms the timer, but doesn't complete the circuit. He wants us to focus on that. The timer itself is the real trigger. Red and blue are decoys, linked to a secondary anti-tamper charge. Arrogant. Her mind was a silent, cold void. The hum in her nerves, the Spectre's hum, was perfectly in tune with the electricity of the device before her. She was not defusing a bomb. She was having a conversation. 30 seconds. Her left hand, trembling, braced against the shell's casing. Her right hand, holding a pair of wire cutters, moved with an impossible speed. 15 seconds. The command post was utterly silent. Madson held his breath. Chun and Gallo watched, their faces pale. Anya's voice was a whisper. The power flows through the timer to the black. But the ground is the green routed through the yellow. A simple interrupt is all it needs. 10 seconds. Her cutters hovered. The shake was pronounced, a visible blur on the helmet cam. 9 seconds. Snip. She cut the green wire. 8 seconds. Snip. She cut the yellow wire. 000:07. Snip. She cut the black wire, severing the connection to the detonators. The timer on the screen continued its descent, powerless but still counting. It hit midnight and blinked uselessly. Silence. Profound, ringing silence. In the command post, the comms officer was staring at his own stopwatch, which he had started the moment her gloves touched the access panel. His mouth hung open. "Sir," he stammered. "Time from first touch to final disable." 9 seconds he looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, I think that's a world record." The revelation came not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet, frantic clicking of a keyboard. While the base was still reeling from the impossible 9-second defusal, the comms sergeant in the command post acted on a desperate, wild hunch. Colonel Madson's words echoed in his head. No one learns to do what she just did by counting blankets. The sergeant had her service number. He had seen the anomaly. On his own initiative, he bypassed the standard personnel database. He used a high-level intelligence clearance code, one he was technically only supposed to use in case of a direct threat to the chain of command, to query the deep archives, the military's digital catacombs where the real records were buried. He typed in her service number and the name. Rostova, ANJA. The system paused, demanding a secondary authorization. He hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. This was career-ending if he was wrong. He looked at the monitor showing Anya walking slowly back from the disabled bomb, a small, tired figure in an oversized suit. He entered the code. The file that returned was not the bland, boring record of a logistics specialist. It was a ghost. Most of it was just blocks of black, redacted text. But the parts that were visible were enough to make the sergeant's blood run cold. Name, Rostova Anya. Rank, Historical Command Sergeant Major. Special Operations. Unit, Classified 7th Special Operations Group. Ghost Division. Call sign, Spectre. Specialty, Advanced Explosive Ordnance Reconnaissance, Air, Covert Infiltration, Direct Action. Below that was a string of commendations, all so heavily coded they were meaningless, followed by a short, chilling summary. Credited with over 200 confirmed solo explosive disarms in active, non-permissive environments. Holds the standing division record for device neutralization under duress. Redacted seconds. Redacted location, the 9 seconds at the gate wasn't a fluke. It was her average. The sergeant scrolled down, his hand shaking, and found the medical report. It was brief and clinical. Status: medically retired from active combat duty. Diagnosis: chronic sympathetic nervous system hyperarousal. Symptomology: persistent, low-amplitude postural tremor in upper extremities. Notes: condition is a direct neurological consequence of prolonged, high-dosage administration of experimental adrenergic stimulants required for extended deep-cover operations. Condition colloquially termed Spectre's hum within the unit. Subject retains full cognitive and fine motor control. Tremor is an involuntary muscular oscillation and does not impair operational effectiveness. At subject's request, she was granted retention in service under a non-combat designation, with rank administratively reduced to specialist to facilitate placement. The sergeant leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily. The shaking hands weren't a sign of fear or age or weakness. They were a scar. They were the physical price she had paid for a lifetime of walking into rooms that were designed to explode. The mockery, the dismissal, it was all so horribly, profoundly wrong. She wasn't a frail old woman. She was a legend hiding in plain sight. He printed the single, unredacted page of the summary. His hands trembled now, mirroring hers. He walked out of the comms bay and directly to Colonel Madson, who was standing by the window, watching Anya being helped out of the heavy EOD suit by Chan and Gallo. "Sir," the sergeant said, his voice barely a whisper. He handed the paper to Madson. Madson took it, annoyed at the interruption. He read the first line. His expression froze. He read the call sign, Spectre, a name that was whispered like a myth in certain high-level intelligence briefings, a ghost story of an operative who could walk through minefields and dismantle bombs in the dark. He read about the specter's hum. He read the note about her voluntary demotion, her choice to remain in service by counting blankets, because she couldn't leave the world she had given her entire life to protect. He looked up from the paper, his face pale. He looked out the window at Anya, who was now just standing there in her faded fatigues, her hands trembling as she accepted a bottle of water from Corporal Chun. He had not just insulted a specialist. He had shown contempt to a living monument, a warrior who had sacrificed pieces of her own body and mind in service of duties he couldn't even imagine. The weight of his ignorance, his arrogance, crushed him. The respect he owed her was a debt that could never be fully repaid. The next morning, the rhythm of the base had returned, but the atmosphere was different. The air was still thick with dust and heat, but the cloud of fear had lifted. The supply route was open. The mood was one of quiet relief and a new, pervasive sense of awe. The whispers about the old lady from logistics were no longer speculative. The truth, or at least a version of it, had spread from the command post. No one knew the details of Ghost Division or the call sign Spectre, but they knew she was more than she appeared. They knew the shaking hands were not a weakness, but a mark of something profound. Anya was back in her corner of the quartermaster's tent. She sat on her folding stool, a tablet in her lap, inventorying a newly arrived crate of medical supplies. She worked with the same methodical quiet as before. To anyone watching, it was as if the events of the previous day had never happened. She asked for no recognition. She expected none. The work was the work. That was all that mattered. Around mid-morning, Colonel Madson walked into the tent. Sergeant Diaz saw him first and immediately snapped to attention, his eyes wide. The two young soldiers who had helped Anya the day before, Chun and Gallo, were also there, fetching supplies. They froze, then stiffened into rigid salutes. The sudden formality cut through the mundane quiet of the tent. Anya looked up from her tablet. Her gaze met Madson's across the stacks of crates. He walked toward her, his steps measured, deliberate. He stopped 5 feet in front of her stool. The entire tent was silent, holding its breath. Madson's face was unreadable, stripped of its usual stress and arrogance. He looked tired, humbled. He looked at the woman sitting before him, a specialist in rank, a giant in stature. He did not speak. Words were inadequate. They would be an insult after his earlier tirade. Instead, he drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a slow, perfectly executed salute. It was not the casual salute one gives a subordinate. It was the deep, formal salute of respect, the kind a soldier gives to the flag or to a fallen hero. It was a public, unequivocal apology and an acknowledgement of a warrior he had been too blind to see. From a full colonel to a specialist. It was a gesture that shattered protocol and spoke a deeper truth. Anya looked at him. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, held his for a long moment. She saw the apology in his gesture. She saw the shame, the newfound respect. Her hands rested on her lap, the tremor a constant, steady hum. She did not salute back. That was not her place. Instead, she gave him a short, crisp nod. A nod of acknowledgement. A nod of acceptance. A nod that said, "We are even." The message was received. Madson held the salute for another second, then lowered his hand, turned, and walked out of the tent without a word. The respect had been offered, and it had been accepted. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. The heat of the day finally broke, and a cool breeze whispered across the gravel of FOB Kestrel. Anya sat alone on a stack of empty water pallets behind the QM tent, looking out past the perimeter fence toward the distant, darkening mountains. This was her quiet time, a ritual she had maintained across a dozen deployments in a dozen forgotten conflicts. She held up her right hand in the fading light, turning it over, examining it as if it belonged to someone else. The tremor was there as it always was, the specter's hum. For years, it had been a source of quiet shame, a physical betrayal of the iron control she prided herself on. It was the reason she had been pulled from the field, the reason she was now counting widgets instead of stalking the shadows. It was a constant, physical reminder of what she had lost. But today something felt different. The humiliation from Madson's initial dismissal had been sharp, a familiar sting. But his salute, so public and so profound, had been a balm. The awe in the eyes of the young soldiers, Chan and Gallo, who now treated her with a reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients, was an unexpected warmth. They did not see a flaw. They saw a cost. They saw the price of courage. She slowly clenched her hand into a fist. The vibration was contained. The energy turned inward. It was not a fist of anger, but of acceptance. The hum was not a weakness. It was a part of her story. It was the echo of 1,000 silent, terrifying moments. It was the ghost of every bomb she had ever met, every life she had ever saved. It was the testament of a warrior. A young private walked by, saw her, and hesitated. He wasn't sure what to do. He settled on a quick, respectful nod before hurrying on his way. Anya watched him go, then unclenched her fist. Her fingers resumed their quiet, ceaseless dance. The respect she had earned today would not change her reality. She would still be a logistics specialist tomorrow. She would still count parts. Her hands would still shake. But the meaning of the tremor had been rewritten, not just for those who saw it, but for her, too. It was no longer a symbol of what was broken. It was the signature of a master. A quiet dignity settled over her, as vast and as peaceful as the desert twilight. The ghost had been seen, and that was enough.